Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Story Telling Podcast. We gather together to make stories, you gather together to listen to stories. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you, our listener, a story. Seth, you want to give us a little recap from last week?
Sure. So last week you had opening scene, Reed had history, and I had something based on a book you're reading. And kind of what we came up with, your beginning scene has kind of this guy coming up to the top of this mountain. He kind of challenges this guy that's already at the top of the mountain, and then these golems kind of come out, right? That's kind of what that would be.
Yeah, like giants
kind of come out of the mountains. And he kind of has until these golems or giants get to their little kind of plateau area at the top of the mountain in order to defeat the other guy. And that's kind of our opening scene to our thing, right?
Correct.
And Reed had history, and so you've kind of got this, what do you call it, like a Type M planet, kind of like the way like Star Trek or...
Right. Just, liquid water.
Liquid water, much like Earth, I was going to say economically, but no, like ecosystemly. Wow, we found a new planet. It's just got the same economics as Earth.
Math works the same there.
We'll just keep going. So anyway, so the only thing is, was there like 3 or 4 continents, did you say?
4 main continents, a couple of big islands, and it's only 50% land mass, and the entire southern, what covers would be the South Pole plus a good portion of the globe. The biggest continent is an Antarctic, lot of ice cover, lot of desert. So that was, and most of the civilization that we know about is in the northern hemisphere.
Right, and then the main kind of continent that most of the civilization is on, I guess you could call it civilization because they're kind of more like in a feudal system kind of development area. Kind of stays at the more northern or the kind of the extremities of this continent, right? Because then like every so often there's like these, like a natural calamity, a lot of earthquakes, hurricanes, upheaval. And I think kind of what we got established was, they kind of get as far away from it as possible because kind of at the equatorial where this happens, most profusely, kind of gets kind of all turned over. And so then their kind of system is that, they kind of get to the edges, where they're going to mostly be safe. And then when they kind of feel that, the turmoil is over, they kind of, everyone kind of sends out scouts and then parties, and they kind of go try to then exploit any of the, the fertile earth that's been turned up, or any of the resources that's been turned up from these things that have happened.
Right.
And then kind of they have like kind of a pretty much a judgeable window of, a few years that they can kind of do this, and then have to kind of, get their assets back to, the coast, before either like marauders or pirates that are kind of going, why should we dig for this? We'll just go take it, right? Or then these calamities kind of come back. And that's kind of, where we're at with, kind of what this planet, world kind of looks like, and a bit of what their economic and, kind of social situation looks like. And then I had something based on a book I'm reading. I kind of pulled kind of the doorway idea from The Dark Tower.
Yeah.
Where like there'll be these doorways, and you can walk through them. And I think with something I got now, it's what they kind of have is it's like a spatial like jump. I think there's some people that would believe that you could jump kind of like a reality or maybe to other places, but a lot of what the people that know about them that can use them, use them to jump, over the river and through the woods straight to grandma's house, right? And then it's kind of this cultural thing where like they tell, it's like a parting blessing, like, may you find the way. They call them, was it the way or the path?
Way or ways.
Right. So I guess that's kind of like Wheel of Time.
Yeah, there's a reference to that, the ways.
Yeah, the ways. Except it's not like you just kind of like step through it and you kind of get there.
Right.
So you have these doors, and then these doorkeepers who kind of then can kind of like open the doors to where it is, and then they kind of, I guess you'd say kind of control the direction or thing, where it's going.
Right.
But and that's kind of what we set up last week for as far as a quick recap, if that sounds
Yeah, we
good.
also had that, I don't know if we wanted to keep it or not, but that sort of interesting magic system where you're kind of giving and taking, whether it be experiences or life. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah, like yeah. So then you've got kind of like a magic system, which might play up into like the beginning scene, where like if he defeats him, then he can like receive his kind of either position or some of his like experience or position. And it's not like, because I think we were talking, we don't want to do this because we did this in the last one where there was like this givey takey thing and kind of making that part of a control system. But it would be like a carpenter, right, who did a certain kind of work his whole life, or a tailor, or, a navigator could then pass off certain information, right? And if you passed off all the information, right, it would kind of be your life. So like if you needed to know how to get to, grandma's house and I knew and you didn't, I could give up that so that you would know, and then you would kind of basically know, right? It would be different than if you had actually learned the way, but it would be a way to pass on. So you have like some of these hierarchies, then pay other people to learn something and then pass it to them. So, that they're, their kind of special child, or what, not special child, but, more important child doesn't have to take, 10 years to learn a language really well.
Right.
And so I think there was this faction we were talking about that, would go and like purposely learn some things wrong so that they'd get paid to then pass that information off to these kind of uppity ups.
Yeah, as a form of like manipulation. Or I also thought we don't have to have it, but we would have typically chosen a hero this session. And since I don't think anyone pulled hero, we had our guy who might have been the hero, who was like the cartographer, who goes out into these new places and memorizes and writes maps, and then trades that, not just the maps but the actual experience to people, the knowledge on how to get to the place to people, because every time this calamity kind of settles down, people sort of rush the field, as it were, to try and, as the volcanoes and stuff settle down, people rush the field as the ground has been kind of turned over. There could be giant gemstones just laying on the ground now because of these like terrible storms, or huge gold veins exposed, and it's like, or incredibly fertile ground, and people sort of in the interim areas rush to this place. So it's kind of pioneery, and try to get in as far as possible and set up farms, start doing mining, and and then there's also all of the information economy that comes out of that, as people are paying people for the best places to stay, paying people for the best places to look for new goods and stuff. So
yeah,
I'm looking at my notes from last time, and I've written something down. It says Shebins, Shebins, and this is after the mapmaker / geologist character guy. And does that mean anything to anybody? I don't remember.
Shebins.
Did I don't know. I'm sorry, that was a senior moment there. I just don't know what I'd written down, but it had to do with that character. One of the things that I'd thrown in is that they've discovered they've got a sister planet in their solar system that it has an erratic, doesn't keep its place. It's in an erratic orbit, and every 40 years it comes in the closest proximity, and there's tidal and gravitational pulls that cause a lot of the seismic activity.
Right.
So it's most calm when it's on the far end of its orbit, and it's fairly predictable. You'll have, as it gets closer, an increasing amount of this volcanoes and seismic activity, and then peak, when it's closest, and then recede again, and then you'll have a period of maybe 20 years of relative calm, but you're still dealing with the upheaval that comes from landscapes that have been changed. What might have been a harbor where you were, your grandfather, your father was, mining or farming, 20 years ago, and now that harbor has been, the rock face is split off, and it's just a completely inaccessible coastline now, or something like that.
Absolutely. What story elements did you guys have for this week?
I have Wise Old Woman.
I had Villian's sidekick.
I had Wise Old Man. Reed, you go first.
Okay, my Wise Old Woman is, they call her Windsong, and she's got a ship. She's got a crew, and I'm sitting here looking at this picture of a sailing ship, of a clipper ship. I have this picture of a ship with sails, and she actually hails from the southern continent, so she's considered kind of exotic. She's been, she'll go away, during the time of rough passage, but she comes back, and she's like a a trader in exotics, items from far away, spices or food or different kinds of things that they'll find. They'll have strange creatures in cages,
Right.
colorful birds from the equatorial areas. And she's a master of sailing a ship, and she's got very loyal crew. And she's always training new, recruiting and training bright people that want to go adventuring. And she tries to map, but she's real interested, and she's heard about the map maker, and she wants to meet him and compare notes. And she's a storyteller, because wherever she goes, she tells these stories from
Right.
distant places. So her main, she's always welcome, but it's a kind of a romantic life, and nobody knows how old she is, but she's very spry and nimble, and goes barefoot on the deck of her ship, and got weathered skin. And
Is she up for hire, said?
yeah, absolutely. She takes on freight and carries it to places. She will buy and sell goods. Yep.
Gotcha.
Cool.
My wise old man is Cain, and he has been alive for more years than he understands. He is the last of the great sort of stewards or guardians of this world. Right now, he operates a station high in the mountains where he, with his sword, holds back the remaining 10 sort of invaders from this other planet, right? Time immemorial, this planet was very lush and full of population, and somewhere along the line, invaders invaded the sister planet to this, which before they kind of were in opposites in their orbit, and they were perfectly aligned, but the planet grew very close, and invaders traveled from that planet to this planet, and it was just pure destruction. And he was sort of at the top of his game. He was at the top of the leadership structure for the armies to destroy and attack their enemies, which were 300 to 400 foot tall seeming stone giants. And he wasn't the one who developed it, but he was a very early adopter of the magic system of balance or experience or whatever you call it. And
so the invaders are the stone giants?
yes,
Okay.
he didn't have the ability. Like at the end of the war, it was just him. And so how it's currently set up is his sword is set into a machine, a magic thing that keeps them asleep. But he had to continue to live. So a whole order was created for him. This was like thousands of years ago, to spread out the myth of the man in the mountain and to drum up, because he needed people to come and challenge him and lose and give him all of their experience. And he's kind of waiting for a time that he is going to be able to take on all. Like, he could probably take on like 3 of these guys, even though they're like, huge, but he can't take on all of them. So he's kind of reliant on this sort of myth, and the order that spread the myth doesn't exist anymore, because the myth has kind of reached critical mass. Like, it just kind of spreads itself now.
Right.
But he is waiting for someone to come who can either defeat him. So there's the whole thing, like, you go up on top of the mountain and you defeat him, and then do you become him? Because no one ever comes down the mountain. No one's ever defeated him.
Okay.
Right. So the myth is you go up there and you get some great power if you defeat him, but no one actually knows if anyone's defeated him. But the answer is no.
Okay.
And so he is just like cataloging in. And so he's like actually kind of adept on the times and the culture and like what's going on, because he basically, every person that comes, he gets all of their information and all of their knowledge and all of their life and everything. So he's just kind of like stuck in this kind of Sisyphus situation, right? He can't leave, because if he takes his sword, which is part of his power and part of you, he can't just leave the sword behind. If he takes his sword out, it wakes the giants up, and the world isn't currently set up. Like, technology isn't, or magic isn't like close to the place it was before, so they would just run roughshod. It's an apocalyptic event waiting to happen. But it'd be interesting if the story somehow had him in it, where either he wanted to leave or people were trying to find him. maybe one of the characters is like trying to train up to find him. I don't know. It's like this thing that exists, and maybe what we're getting, because are we saying the timeline now is that we're close to one of those cataclysmic events, or it's just over, right?
Yeah, I had in my mind that the wise old woman reappeared after the seas kind of the troubled seas sort of calmed down, and then she heads out on her missions and she stops in and checks, it sees some of the changes that have taken place on her working her way north, and then she'll come with all the exotic things that she's picked up on the way, and she'll trade
Right.
them for things, but she is and she's got notes and drawings. She's wants to get with the map maker and share her info with them. But I had in mind that the troubled times have been over now for a while. Kind of they're in the tranquil time.
Okay, but we're not close to them coming back.
Right.
Gotcha.
It depends on how you call close, 20,
Yeah.
20, 30 years,
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to think, because I'm trying to figure out, it's always the crux of a story. It's like, what's the difficult thing that's going to happen? And
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be that we're right on the edge of the bad times coming back. It could
Mhm.
just be like the world is a mess right now, And I kind of like the idea of pirates. I kind of like the idea of a sort of Inigo Montoya kind of guy
Yeah.
who's like, I have to like train up, and because I'm gonna defeat that guy, the guy on the mountain.
Is part of the Kane, is that his name? Part of his longevity is that he goes into, like, when he places the sword back into the machine, he kind of goes into stasis himself.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought. Is that he kind of not goes to sleep, but maybe sort of like turns to stone, and then when you come up there, he's able to sense your presence. But also, when he defeats you, you give him everything.
Yeah.
That's like part of the contract. So he gets all of your life force, and the person dies.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to bring in the villain sidekick, and then I have a couple ideas to interject with some of the stuff you set up, so we can see, how part of the story might move on. But,
okay.
So we have the villain sidekick, which don't exactly know who the villain is, although I think I'm going to bring the villain in a little bit to some extent. So there might be a couple villains the way that this comes out, but main villain or a villain here, whose sidekick is Quincy. And Quincy is a scientist, and I wouldn't say exactly evil himself, but he, at least as we're kind of coming into it at first, is, kind of doing his bidding, but kind of under the idea that he's like moving science ahead. Right? Because he's like the top of his field, and he's got the team who know what they're doing, and they're just like cutting edge into this stuff, right? But, who's funding them, right? Who's having them do this?
Right.
And so what it is he is studying these ways, these doors, right? And kind of what he's being funded to do is not only figure out how to open them, would it be like spatially, but like see if they can open them up to like other places. Like some old legends say that we originally came here through these ways, right, where these ways opened up and we were able to like jump between worlds or timelines, or to kind of like weird like sub pockets of reality that might have tons of resources but are only accessible through this, right? There's all the legends that have been passed down, and really what his employer wants is to open up this thing so that he has kind of a way to bypass the gatekeepers of this, or the doorkeepers, and open up his own doors, and not just kind of step from like here to New York, or something like that, like distance wise on this planet, but to the next planet over, right? And it's kind of like that idea, like what might be on that sister planet, we know it comes by every so often, what kind of things are up there, we struggle for life so bad, and like maybe we can get right. So there's all this like hopeful optimism of all like the science that could be done, and that's kind of what draws him into it. And on his team he's got some of these people that were in with the doorkeepers, right? And so like he's got the information of like this is kind of how they work and this is what they do. However, the only problem is because they're kind of a closed off sect, right? And I would say, kind of like if you kind of like one of those secret society kind of things where it's like, if you divulge this, then you'll be hunted, and you can't, because this is like super important, and
Right.
only the initiated, right? But then as you initiate more, you learn more. And so if someone doesn't like it at first, they can come out and seem like they know a lot of stuff to someone who doesn't know anything, right? And so that's what a lot of his team is built up with, is either other, like, quote unquote scientists and alchemists, and all these experts that are doing this,
Right.
to try to then either like open up like a door through time, right, to go back or go forward or any of these other things. And that kind of sets up, who he is. He's kind of the head mad scientist, but I would say not necessarily purposely evil himself, but definitely overlooking a lot of things that he might be able to see if he realized that,
Yeah, you spent so long asking if you could, you never asked if you should, sort
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah, no, I like that.
And so that would be the villain's sidekick. And maybe he gets kind of roped into it and, really kind of embraces evil later. Maybe he kind of comes back and helps the heroes, but that is kind of who he is. And I have this idea. So kind of with that, right? What you said about like these giants, the invaders from the other planet, they came here, right? And perhaps they came here, and to make a way, right, through one of these doorways,
Right.
right, they needed to have like the right spot. Maybe that's kind of how it is. I mean, you're like ley lines, I think is
Yeah.
what it is, right? So it's like the geographic grid and like certain like, hot spots in different areas, right? And so, that idea where, some of these things, and the doorway that they need to make for the actual full invasion is where that guy's up on the mountain,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
right? And so if he is kind of holding them back, and that's why they keep coming closer and closer and closer, because that's where they need to be, because that's where they need to open up their doorway. So when that planet's closer, it's then in line, for them
Right.
to come across.
Right.
And
I had this really interesting idea as you were talking about that. I think that the whole ways and everything are all connected to these stone giants, right?
Yeah.
So when we think, oh, there's like this hill here, and there's a way through to Grandma's house if you go through it. Really, what there is there's one of these massive giants buried there from the war, and it's kind of weighs energy. Maybe it's like quantum entanglement, is still active. And so it's like, that's why they have a difficult time understanding why it's like ley lines. It's like places of power we don't understand. It's because it's these giants, and they're still kind of giving off this energy, and it kind of attaches to people's desires or people's thought processes, which is what leads it, which is what makes it function, basically. What do you think about that, Seth?
no, I like it. Which then kind of in my idea of like these gatekeepers, which makes them not like they have to be ridiculous, but in a ridiculous way where like this almost like pseudo religion is built around it, and it has nothing to do with actually like helping the giants or not helping the giants, but it's kind of a thing of power. And so the right people that kind of half figured it out, but like might, still have it shrouded in this like mysterious way. I think that would be like an interesting idea for these gatekeepers who kind of like function it and do it. And they've got like,
Yeah.
their ways of doing things and their secret information and, about the power of these things, but they're also kind of missing the point.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think that would be kind of a good way to have it. Not because, they're stupid, but just because, that's just kind of how they adapted it. And so they've developed their thing and their way of thinking around like kind of the more mystical idea of its operation.
Here's kind of an interesting thought. What if it was kind of like Attack on Titan? So what if it was kind of like Attack on Titan? What if the big giants are just the suits, just like the armor, just like Reed's pointing to a Gundam figure. Absolutely. just like that. And they have, in some ways, like when they realized that they were losing, some of them abandoned their giants, and they look different, but not so different that it would be just like, oh, that's a foreigner.
Right.
They weren't like still 11 feet tall. They, still had a similar visage, but maybe a little bit taller, they talked a little bit different. They were able to basically assimilate back in.
They were from France.
Yeah, that Conehead reference. Very good. But in this way, the gatekeepers are kind of like their descendants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who now kind of hold up this kind of mystical knowledge that was kind of passed down to them, but kind of not, you know? I kind of like that idea.
I'm assuming that the invaders, the giants, they traveled from the planet through a gateway. They're not like in spacecraft or something, but it can only happen when they're in close proximity.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You know, like the platform that they were fighting on was
Right.
like 400 feet or like 200 feet
Yeah.
disc.
Yeah.
Kind of like it's got to like get close to each other and line up. And my thought process is that at first, you know, maybe even Kane doesn't remember this, but at first, these two planets were like in communion with each other. They were in lockstep orbit, always facing each other, and there was travel freely between them.
Yeah.
You know, and then something happened, and this other planet, you know, attacked them, and he grew up during that war, so he never really kind of understood what was happening or what life was like before. And now we're kind of living in a kind of how Lord of the Rings is like a post-apocalyptic world, you know?
Yeah.
Tolkien talks a lot about like vast open places where men used to live,
Right.
you know? Kind of that's the picture I get when you talk about these islands and like the change, and everyone kind of like lives in tents still. And it's
Right.
like if you get to the right places, there's stone houses, but you know, even in the really safe places, when all of the volcanoes are going off, they're like the whole world kind of shakes.
Yeah.
You know? So that's the thing I was thinking about. And I was thinking about the hero, and I think that this cartographer mapmaker person needs to be like the hero's sidekick or the anti-hero or somebody who dips in, helps the hero out a little bit, but I don't think he's the hero. I feel like the hero is someone who is kind of like a Naruto, kind of like a Leafy from One Piece, kind of like a hopeful, kind of like I'm gonna become the best fighter ever, you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna, and so he gets a crew, and it's kind of a lighthearted thing at first as he travels around to these places and challenges the masters of these fighting houses, you know, dojos essentially, you know, and he has some secret, which we can figure out at some point, you know, that gives him an edge. You know, maybe he is descendant from the giant people, so he has kind of he can see the way through things, so he has some future sense, or he has something, you know, that gives him that kind of, that makes him the main character, you know, and he's basically going around fighting. So that like the first kind of part of the book, it's kind of like a fun kind of adventure going around fighting, but then things start to like creep up and start to tighten up a little bit, you know, and all of a sudden the scientist is making breakthroughs in ways that, like, you know, maybe they find some of the giant type creatures, you know, which he now knows are different, so he knows that he's different, and so that's kind of weird. But he finds that the scientist guy has been like doing experiments on some of them, and he's like, whoa.
Okay, so
all of a sudden there's like a moral issue here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking how we can tie that in. Our hero character is the nephew, maybe an orphan nephew of our cartographer, kind of scout guy.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, oh, your parents died and I took you in, and so he has that kind of like, I'm looking for my place because, you know, my parents are gone and I know my uncle loves me and he teaches me all kinds of stuff. But then he sees the exciting life his uncle lives, right? You know, always going out and, you know, doing stuff and,
right,
you know, really cool, and you can map it all out. And so that is possible. It kind of spurns him into like kind of doing something. Maybe that's how he gets roped in, is like, oh, okay, you know, like, you know, okay, I did my run for this year, but, you know, now I'll join my, you know, nephew on his quest to this other thing. The other thing with the villain sidekick, I didn't get to earlier, but there's it's where this facility is at, would be on like an island farther north. I think you said the north was ice capped as well.
Yeah, but there's a lot of open ocean and stuff.
Yeah. So the villain, whoever he is, you know, kind of a mysterious vampire kind of figure, I would think, right?
Yeah.
You know, something that, you know, perhaps he's very old, and maybe he's, you know, maybe like Cain, almost like the antithesis to Cain, but he's been trying to like get these ways back open all these years, right?
Yeah.
Or find a way to open it other than where Cain is kind of stopping it from happening.
Right.
And he's got this kind of like, would it be like an archipelago? So it'd be like a several island enliven thing.
Yeah.
Right?
That could be cool. Yeah.
Pretty far north, so it's like really cold and pretty much stays out of line of most of the harsh things that are more equatorial. The only
Right.
thing, it would be like these islands like sit on like a hot springs kind of idea. So like every time there's the things, they actually get a bit of an enlivened thing because then it'll like bubble up, but not terrible, but it'll just like it keeps it warm. And so
Right.
kind of like there's almost like an oasis thing, but then like he owns all the islands and he kind of keeps them blocked off. There might be someone like, did you have a name for your lady, Reed?
Yeah, they call her Windsong.
Windsong. So like she might make it up there, like get paid to, bring supplies and, knows of that place and, brings information or materials back and forth or, I don't know, some other connection, but that's where it's at. It's
kind of up north.
Kind of up north, and I'd say there's some important people know about it because they make these shipments and a lot of like certain material is heading north, or certain elites, right, get like vacations, right, and so they can fund his project to help science and his kind of facility up there, and the right people get to vacation there over the really hard time,
right, because it's
right?
kind of like an oasis.
Yeah, and it's like it's up north and cold, but it's like in the right enough position where it's not too affected, but has like enough of like the geological was it hot spring kind of idea, so these stay kind of more tropical, but inside of a more.
Yeah, this world is making me think more and more of the world of One Piece, which is an anime. I don't know, Seth, if you read it at all or watched it at all.
I watched, I think, the first 10 episodes maybe 20 years ago.
It's very good.
Yeah.
But I have these visions of these like highly unique islands, because the islands are where you're safe. It's the continents where things are bad. So it's like all of society is jammed in its most civilized place on the islands, and then all of the continents contain all of the kind of rowdy, barbaric kind of meatheads. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So maybe that's where these different lords are, and maybe our villain is just one of those lords. And that whole continent, you have some of the, lower class or like those privateers for hire.
You're right.
So each time they come in, it's like, okay, now it's time to go out, and they, hire these people, and they go out and they get their stuff and they pay them, and that's their life, right? But then the actual who's who and lords of these different like land holdings that then go into this place, have their own resorts and
Right.
kind of places which kind of don't have a lot of resources themselves, but they're relatively safe.
Right. I just have this vision of him, kind of of our main character / fighter guy, kind of traveling around, island to island or coastland to coastland. Kind of, it starts off in kind of an island group that's relatively low tier, and then he starts heading up north, and he hits a couple islands, and that's where you kind of get used to who he is and how he acts. And then he hits the mainland. Maybe he's like traveling there to see his uncle, and so then he hits the mainland, and then all of a sudden, like, all of these plot points, which were kind of like hinted at if you were reading in the book, like certain ways that certain people were acting or certain ways that certain people were talking about, all of a sudden just like all these little plot points start to like come up, and at some point our fighter has like the option to either like turn aside from his quest to become the greatest swordsman that ever existed, or to turn over and like rescue these people or go on this quest that's like not sort of serving himself,
Right.
And my thought is that he goes on that quest to not serve himself, but it like through the fighting and through the moving and stuff, it leads him to the mountain anyways, right? Because he's a fighter, and everyone knows that if as a fighter, as a swordsman, your journey ends either at your death or at the mountain. That's just how it is.
Okay, so he might not be on the mainland. His uncle then goes there, and like maybe it's like he's come of age now, right?
Right.
And so he catches a ride and kind of works for.
What's her name?
What's her name, Reed?
Windsong.
Windsong. I was close. It was Windsong. And so kind of like works for her on her ship, right? As she's going from some of these different places, bringing some supplies and shipping people over to different places. And he kind of, is doing his thing at first where he's like, all right, I need to go meet my uncle. But like, so his uncle's doing all like the exploration.
Yeah.
Right. And they have that like kind of boon time where everything's kind of nice. His uncle's going out, kind of figuring everything out, and then he's going to go with the uncle at some point and kind of go through, and the uncle's going to kind of like, this is how we look for this, and this is how we look for that, and kind of bring him into the thing. Now, it might be like a couple years of time between getting from there to then meeting up with his uncle at the one port to then, safely go back through to learn, how to, navigate some of this stuff. And so in between there, he's kind of riding, and you have that kind of like travel adventure with Windsong.
Yeah.
As then he's kind of, like going to each of the different gyms, right? Finding different, masters, or, picking up, someone that's inspired by his mission or his, like, his dream. And so they get on the kind of the ship too, and then they go to the next place, and, whatever that.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's basically, I mean, from what I've seen of One Piece, that's basically it. Except he has an end goal. Like, Luffy just wants to be like the greatest pirate. He wants to find the One Piece and become the king of pirates. But that's regardless. We're not retelling that. So I kind of like this. If this is all going to be one story, then I think the first half would have to be sort of this fun, winsome thing, and then it kind of something happens which causes the split to happen as soon as he gets to the mainland. Right? It's kind of like this fun, like you were saying, collecting gym badges. It's kind of like this fun collecting gym badges. He's learning how to be a better person, and, sword fighting and learning techniques. And, Windsong is there to give him her wisdom. And then something happens when they make landfall on the mainland, because the mainland is where all the islands of the world dump all of their prisoners, right?
Oh.
And then patrol the coasts and don't let anyone come back, because the islands are the centers of civilization, and the mainland is the thing that shifts and changes. So he gets to the mainland, and that's kind of like in the middle of the book, where all of a sudden everything that he sort of talked about and dreamed about, like, it's like, oh, you were serious about that? Let me see how serious you were about that, And then like I said, those plot points start to like pop out, and then he gets these like sort of difficult decisions. Is he gonna like follow his uncle into the wilderness where there's more relative safety? Is it time for him to do that? Is he gonna follow this trail of like people that share the same nationality as him, which speaks to the giant air people being kind of like tortured and stuff? Is he gonna follow that?
Yeah.
It's like all these different options. But I think that's enough for this week. We can definitely figure that out next week. What do you guys say?
I say yes.
Good.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait It Gets Better. If you like this episode, please let me know. Send me a message on Twitter at @getsbettercast, or send me an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. If you like this episode, I'd love to hear from you. If you didn't like this episode, I would say just wait, it gets better.